I'm going to be very short. I could talk about Patty for about 2 hours, but I won't. I'm so happy she came. She's not only a colleague of mine, someone I've worked with, but a friend, and was a teacher to my students, to my children, and is just one of the most remarkable educators that I know. She's currently serving as the Director of Art Education for Tufts University in conjunction with the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston. But she is best known, I believe, as a nationally and possibly internationally recognized multicultural educator. She just is brilliant and seamlessly integrates global education, respect for different cultures around the world, social justice,
classroom teacher for 16 years in public schools before I started teaching teachers at Tufts University. So that's when I taught Rita's girls. So the title of the talk, Social Action and Art, African American History and Contemporary U.S. Culture, a kind of a big topic for a 30-minute talk. So I want to jump right in and tell you what we will try to do today and what we will try not to do today. So the assumptions underlying today's presentation. This is an assumption I brought with me. Greenfield Community College embraces multicultural education. I know this well, and there's the book that Rita mentioned that my mentor and friend and colleague now, Sonia Nieto, invited me to be co-author on. And I bring that up because I looked at our assumptions that underlie our book, and I equated those with what I know about GCC. I have sent many, many students here. I have foster children who have attended here, and very, very close, deep family friends who are currently here, as well as former students who are in the audience. So I know a lot about what you do, and I'm very supportive and a big fan. We could talk about each of these points. The fourth one I really want to just mention that I think we should all make sure President Obama knows we were listening to the keynote speech when he said he was going to fund community colleges, and we should really make our voices heard and help you get the funding that you need to keep up this great work. About this assumption, it's rooted in Sonia's definition of multicultural education, which when I give this talk elsewhere, I always say, don't tell Sonia Nieto that I'm boiling down her life's work into one slide, but the cat's out of the bag, sorry. With apologies to Sonia, we don't have a lot of time to talk about it, but this definition that I'm undergirding this talk is really supported by Sonia's work that she asserted many years ago to help us understand what we mean by multicultural education. So one thing we say is that multicultural education needs not just to consider schooling or community college, but the social, economic, political context of the world in which we live. So our talk today is going to look at the role of the arts in this, in interrogating, expressing, and renaming and reshaping the world in which we live. Another assumption that underlies my presentation is that African American History Month was, and still is, a really good idea. Despite its limitations, despite the fact that when Carter Woodson asserted the idea in 1915 and it became official in 1926, that I don't think he ever imagined that some of the problems that would happen where people get, in history, get compressed to only 1 month or 1 week or diversity day or week. So we always have to continue to fight against that, but at the same time, until we have full integration of everybody's histories, it's still a really good idea. Also, I wanted to connect Carter Woodson and Elaine Locke, who is known as the founder of the Harlem Renaissance, which we're going to talk about in a little bit, and point out the role of education and the role of higher education, post-secondary education, in everybody's lives that we're going to look at today in terms of history. Woodson, second PhD from Harvard as an second African-American PhD. Everybody knows who the first one was? Little quiz. Du Bois, right? And then a little bit later, so Elaine Locke got his undergrad, but later got his PhD in 1916. And so we could talk on. Locke was the first African-American Rhodes Scholar. Okay, so these were our goals, looking closely and deeply at a few images, examine some student responses. What is the political and anti-racist role of community colleges in the education of the arts for full participation in democratic societies? Is this presentation doesn't let STEM off the hook, the science, technology, engineering. Whoops, I meant to put math in there at the end. So because this presentation is about art doesn't mean it is not about fully embracing art in all facets of life, nor does it mean art doesn't embrace STEM. And as a matter of fact, there's a huge movement afoot to move this abbreviation from STEM to STEAM and integrate A. John Maida, who's the president of RISD, Rhode Island School of Design, is leading this charge. He has a very cogent, exciting argument for our public schools, our public colleges, our community colleges, and all other forms of higher ed to take this up. There's a lot of talk about this in the popular press about who we need to be running our country, who we need to be running our corporations, who we need to be teaching our young, and imagination and multiple ways of problem solving need to be part of that. And that the arts are a way to get there. Doesn't mean that everybody is an art major in college. And then the third thing that we won't do is we're not going to provide a comprehensive art history lecture. Okay, go. Here we go. All right, so here's the government of the people, by the people, for the people, right? Here we are in this great democracy. So what is education for, and what is the role of art in education? This is what we're going to be thinking about. Full active participation in a democratic society, and where art is a piece of that. Here are all the connections between African American art history and contemporary society. So what do we have going on here? Can you see the images in this upper, your left? So what do you see in the upper left? Right. Yep, right, 50s and 60s, civil rights era. Okay, women's movement, the Chicano movement, gay rights movement. This is our most recent immigration movement. And here we have Occupy Wall Street. So lots of people asking, who counts? What does it mean to be American? What does it mean to be included? How do we participate in a democratic society? And one of the arguments I make is that what we're looking at here is part of our visual culture, which is now driving. A lot of sociologists are saying that our youth today are reading 80,000 times more images than they are printed text. It's a big number. And that the way in which we interpret visual imagery and video and web and everything else is our knowledge. So, you know, who but we, art educators, right, and multicultural educators ought to be there to help guide this process and facilitate this process. So, with that in mind, I'd like to invite you, the last image there, this was from Occupy Wall Street. Did anybody visit Occupy Springfield or Boston or Wall Street? Okay, so were you there for a General Assembly? No. All right, so has everybody heard about the open mic process for General Assembly, whereby the person speaking, this was the process that was embraced because, you know, megaphones and microphones were, by city ordinance, are not allowed. Were not allowed in the parks where a lot of the protesters were gathering. So the organizers took up an age-old process of being human mics, whereby the speaker would speak a phrase, and then the first 100 or 200 people who could hear them would repeat it, and then it would get repeated back again and back until all thousands and thousands of people could hear what was going on. Kind of like the game of telephone, except the goal was to not change any of the words. And so by the very act of repeating the speaker's words, right, we're in the process together, whether or not we agree with them. So it's this active form of listening and speaking and actually making voice audible in a really physical, embodied way. So I'd like to start with us doing that together with the words of Paulo Freire to lead us into the presentation. And so I'll read Freire's words, and then you repeat. So, education either functions as an instrument, which is used to facilitate integration of the younger generation into the logic of the present system, and bring about conformity. Or it becomes the practice of freedom. The means by which men and women deal critically and creatively with reality and discover how to participate in the transformation of their world. Thank you. So what's striking to me is the incorporation of critically and creatively in so many of Freire's work and so many liberation educators' work, whether or not they're talking about the arts, but thinking about the creative process and how that gets embodied. So we'll use that to guide us through here and look at this particular piece of artwork. And I'm going to ask you, no grade for your art history knowledge, okay? It's open forum. Ask you two things about this image. What do you notice and what do you wonder? I have to get closer so I can see you. Go ahead and yell out. Pretend you're in 7th grade. I taught 7th grade for the last 8 years of my career before I was in higher ed. So just yell out, what do you notice? So what's your knowledge? Or what are your questions? What do you wonder? There's musicians. What makes you say that? Okay, so somebody sees a trumpet and you're saying you think this might be a drum. Okay, what else do you notice or wonder? Anybody? Say that again? You see the Ku Klux Klan over here in the upper left on the horses. Okay, what else do you notice? Is this an Aaron Douglas painting? Sonia, one of my former students, says. Yes, yes, it is an Aaron Douglas painting. She's wondering. Great. What else do you notice or wonder? Flowers, palm trees. What's that telling us? Hot. It's hot. Okay, so it's telling us something about the climate. Cotton. Are they flowers or is it cotton? Okay, so there's a question. Is it cotton, palm trees, climate, KKK, trumpet? Is this a drum? Do we still think this is a drum? Okay, a barrel of cotton. So this happens every single time. I've showed this hundreds of times. And we make these visual associations. This is a trumpet. This must be a drum.
Is that an auctioneer?
Is that an auctioneer? So we're wondering who is the guy in the middle and what's he doing? He could be an auctioneer. Who else could he be? A leader, a speaker, a conductor, could be Martin Luther King. Okay, so we're not sure about this guy in the middle. There's gesture that's telling us all these things. Human gesture, the way the artist has positioned him. What's on the hill? What do you think's on the hill? Sort of looks like Capitol Hill, could be a government building, not sure. So some important architecture on the hill. Concentric circles.
And also the color of the concentric circles and the intensity.
The color of the concentric circles. So we've got concentric circles centering here and here. And this color, which those of us in the art department know these are monochromatic colors, right? It's part of our color theory. What else? Anything you notice or wonder? Looks like a dancer on the right. Again, the way the artist has pictured the gesture. You may not be able, I'm going to show you a couple things you may not be able to see just because of the screen. This is a broken chain on his wrists. Can anybody see these figures lined up back here? Yeah. Who are they?
Police. Buyers.
They could be police because why?
Holding crowds back, controlling.
They're holding crowds back or controlling. What else somebody said?
I said buyers. They're slave buyers.
Oh, they could be purchasing enslaved people. Okay, what?
It looks like weapons.
Weapons, soldiers. What made you say soldiers? Yeah, they're all carrying the exact same thing, and they have the exact same hat on, and I've shown this to people who are like experts in Civil War and say, oh, I know that hat's a Civil War soldier. Okay, so we've got two armies, somebody in the center, we're not sure his role, figures.
The clothing is different. On the left, it doesn't look like people are wearing much of any clothing, and then on the right, people are like suits and hats.
So we have a difference in attire. And the artist is not giving us buttons and zippers and stripes, but giving us what? How do we know this?
Shape.
Yeah, just a silhouette, right? Anything else you notice or wonder?
The people on the right, in the middle of the picture, with their arms over their heads.
Here? Oh. Okay. Okay, what could that be? What might be happening? Praying, cheering, clapping, praising. Okay, could be lots of different things. Okay. Could holding up the pushing up the price. Yeah. Okay, what is the story of this painting?
History.
History.
History of the African American people.
History of the African American experience, the African American people. Because, is it one point in time, Sonia? Right, lots of times, right? We saw clothing changing, we see activities happening. Okay, so does anybody, oh, Sonia told us this is Aaron Douglas. Are you studying art here?
Yeah,
Oh, I'm so proud of her. Okay, I'd be proud of you no matter what you were studying. Okay, so this is, like Sonia said, the GCC student. What year are you in now?
this is my second year here.
Great. The title of this painting, because it was painted in 1934, right? So he's using the language of the day. Aspects of Negro life from slavery through Reconstruction. So this was painted during what period of time? Right, the Depression. This was, what was the stimulus package called back then?
WPA.
Right, WPA. He's a WPA artist. This is in the New York Public Library. It's still there. And, you know, a part of a giant series. And Aaron Douglas, for those of you who don't know, well, Sonia, do you want to tell us anything else about Aaron Douglas that you know? It's okay if you don't. Okay, too much pressure. So, he's really well known as the leader of the painters of the Harlem Renaissance movement. So, and the founder of the art department of Fisk University, and on and on. So, a very significant figure in African American history. Notice what happened if we had just looked at this painting for 20 seconds. Which is, by the way, when people go to museums, really unusual for people to spend longer than a minute or two on a painting, and often 30 seconds. So here's Aaron Douglas. He lived a long, healthy life, right? Lived till 1979 when he was 80 years old, and studied taught at Fisk for a long time. And in the 1920s and 30s, like I said, was a leader in the Harlem Renaissance movement, and here he is with Alain Locke, who often known as the father of the Harlem Renaissance movement itself. So here's what I want to say about the Harlem Renaissance. Who studied Harlem Renaissance in school? Anybody? I know we did. Yeah? What did you study? Music? Okay. Literature. What was the premise? What did you learn about the Harlem Renaissance movement? How would you describe it? Or did your textbooks describe it, or your teachers?
Synthesis of time and place and creativity and expression.
Okay, time, place, creativity, expression. Thank you for that. Anybody else? How many people never heard of the Harlem Renaissance? Because that's often the case, too. But what I have found in textbooks is this has many times been described as an explosion of the arts. An explosion of the arts. All the black folk got together and said, we're all just going to make art now. This is one of these watering downs of social political movements in our textbook for, you know, tailored for school use, as Jonathan Kozol says. So the Harlem Renaissance was not just a coincidental explosion of the arts. It was a very deliberate political, intellectual movement, and which many argue is the precursor to the civil rights movement, that civil rights movement would not have been able to happen if the Harlem Renaissance movement hadn't pushed forward the intellect and the performance and also the connection of the African American community in the way that it did nationally and internationally. And that was led by intellectuals also working with artists in their intellectual and creative prowess. So when I worked with people like Jasmine and Sonia when they were in 7th grade, we looked at work like Aaron Douglas and then asked questions about what we knew as 7th graders about the civil rights era and depicted our own version. And we studied typical arts and elements of design, like concentric circles and monochromatic colors. And then also, after studying that, looked at imagery from the civil rights era and did our own interpretations, and then also asked, what issues do we face today? And looked at imagery that we had from our era, whatever that might be. Here's the teacher's strike last year in Wisconsin and other places. All right, so these are some of the images that young people came up with. I'm going to zip through them really quickly. And you can see they did one which was depicting the civil rights era and one that was depicting themselves in their own era. So kind of embodying the idea of social action in the arts is really important for youth and college students today. Sometimes their sign, the assignment was you had to pick a sign to show your knowledge of the civil rights era. This one said spread wealth and end poverty, and sometimes the sign said the same thing for the issue of today. And in this case, no segregation. This was about interracial marriage and changing laws, and this was about gay rights and gay marriage. Okay, so in this way, the young people are asserting their knowledge about history, but also seeing the role of arts in depicting history. And it was really important to emphasize that Aaron Douglas wasn't alive during the 1860s. He was an artist in the 1930s looking back at history and figuring out that timeline in our own adult heads, I think, is important, as well as for young people. Because, like Rita said, that could be Martin Luther King, which it could have been in that painting because it was layering so many years and we didn't yet know it was 1934. But that's often what I would hear from 12 and 13 years old, even at 12 and 13, is that Martin Luther King freed the slaves. Right? Because there's this conflation of historical events, but the other problem is he's the only good black guy we know. Right? There's a pointing toward the importance of looking at the span of history, and what is omitted is really important to look at. Okay, so moving on, this same image I used, we could do a whole day, week, year on the school-to-prison pipeline. But I just wanted to mention that I used the same image in work I've done in DYS facilities for court-involved youth who are in residential facilities. And I did this in Roxbury, Dorchester, and also in Springfield. And I want you to know that this book, in the very first paragraph of this book, which is a policy and law book, says that students in under-resourced schools and districts with inadequate exposure to the arts are more likely to be snagged in the school-to-prison pipeline. There's an equation. We don't have a lot of empirical data yet, but a big equation between schools with little or no arts and dropout rates. Little or no arts and school-to-prison pipeline. Little or no arts and school disengagement. So in this case, I was asked to come into this facility, and they said, can you develop a curriculum based on the work of Shepard Fairey? This is Shepard Fairey, for those of you who don't know him. He's like 42 years old. He was a RISD alum. He's the son of a dentist and has had a really productive life. And I said yes and no, because I wanted to desegregate the art curriculum based on Geneva Gay's work. And so this probably looks real familiar to you now, right? If you didn't know his work before. So there's a big exhibit of his work. And what we did was we said, okay, we're going to start the curriculum with Aaron Douglas and move through mural making throughout history. And so the students engaged first with Aaron Douglas, and we followed American history through mural making and mural painting. These are some of the sketchbooks that the students came up with. And by the way, this was taught in math and science class. So we did a lot of geometry, we did a lot of color theory, we did a lot of timelines. The history teacher jumped in and said, I want in on this. And we looked at images and how we interpreted them and from whose gaze we were interpreting them, and become much more conscious about media literacy. And then we looked at current contemporary artists like Bernard Williams, who's part of the Chicago Public Art Group. And look at that. Oh, Civil War. Oh, history. Oh, Abe Lincoln. Technology, family, Native American history. this is what contemporary artists are drawing upon. So Bernard Williams gives a big nod to the Harlem Renaissance, and his work and his stuff's all over Chicago. If you're there, you should look up the Chicago Public Art Group. And then we took a trip to the Institute of Contemporary Art Boston, and these were the students, and that was a whole feat in itself, which I won't go into, which is getting the kids permission to leave in order to go to a museum. But while we were there, I'll just tell you a really quick story. The kids had studied so much of history and science and math and literature before we even got to Shepard Fairey. And by now, they're completely engaged, and this was a retrospective of Shepard Fairey's work. So they were all in the galleries with their little clipboards, just like yours, with pencils, because we had given them worksheets and engagement sheets to do. And 3 elderly white women came up to Anthony and Jose and said, "Excuse me, please, do you work here? Because could you explain this work to me?" And Anthony said, "We don't work here, but we can explain it to you." And he ended up giving them a tour, with our permission, of the whole building and the whole exhibit, and he actually has a job there now. So, I mean, it's a great ending to a story, but it also points to, again, the community college role in the school-to-prison pipeline. What I'd like to see is flip it, right, and have a pipeline from court-involved youth into community college, and the promises of what can happen with that. These are some of the results of their work after studying those artists.
These are the DYS.
Yeah, these were the DYS youth, and this was, you know, not art majors, and most of them hadn't had an art class in their lives. This was Anthony, our tour guide at the ICA, who said, "This is a symbol of the past, of the violence that's been left behind, and this is a symbol of strength and determination to go forward into a healthy environment." So moving on with the clock, I wanted to talk a little bit more about the reach of the Harlem Renaissance. So one thing that's really spectacular to note about the Harlem Renaissance is if you look at gender roles and you look at the New York City art scene, which was dominated by white males in the 1920s to 1950s and beyond, you see only males, maybe 1 or 2 women. But in the Harlem Renaissance, it's sort of not the mainstream New York art scene. So I'm talking about the New York art scene that was accepted by mainstream, right? If you look at the Harlem Renaissance, you have full equal participation by men and women together in collaboration. Really interesting. So Louise Maylou Jones, you can see, was a contemporary of Aaron Douglas and graduated from the school where I work. And she taught at Howard University for 47 years. So again, looking at the role of higher ed in people's lives. She started out as a designer, a textile designer, but she was really proud of her work. And she was driving through Connecticut one day and stopped in a shop because she saw her fabrics made into a dress in the shop window. So she decided to stop and tell the shopkeeper. And the shopkeeper was incredulous that it couldn't possibly have been her because she's African American. And so she said, "Okay, I got to go start teaching." So she went back to the museum school, which is the nickname for the SMFA, the School of Museum of Fine Arts, and said, "You know, I think I need to teach so that students can see the accomplishments of African Americans." And they said, maybe you should go down south and teach your people. Which, as a middle-class black from Boston, she had never thought about the South as her people. Actually, she decided to do that for a few years and then came to Howard University and did her career after teaching in public schools for a while. So her work is really significant as one of the first artists to, so Aaron Douglas was showing us history. She picked up African aesthetic. This was very, very, well, these are 1972, but she started doing this in the 30s. Picking up African aesthetic from mask, and because she was a designer, right? A fiber arts. So she was looking at mud cloth and looking at kente cloth and really interweaving it figuratively into her work. Very, very profound impact on contemporary culture. And then we've got Faith Ringgold moving forward. She doesn't tell us her birth year, by the way. But she's younger than Louise Maylou Jones and older than me. And 17 honorary doctorates, no slouch. Most well known for Tar Beach, her book. But has a giant, expansive body of work. So here are her story quilts that she's really well known for. But she does lots and lots of other work. These figures, which are, again, an intersection of African aesthetic and contemporary aesthetic. She does a lot of political imagery dealing with kind of Americana sort of sacred icons, like the Statue of Liberty and the flag. This is called her series, The Flag is Bleeding. And she was extremely politically active in her youth. She still is. So I just wanted to read you a little bit from her bio that she says. This is her own biography in her own words. So she tells us that she and Poppy Johnson and Lucy Lepard in 1970 formed an ad hoc women's group because there was such a small percentage of women in the Whitney annuals. She wanted 50% women. That was their goal. And there was 1 or 2% women, I think, at the time. So the total percentage, okay, 23% at that point. She had started this earlier. She got it up to 23%. They did this by doing all kinds of artistic happenings and action in the galleries, where they would go in and leave eggs everywhere, raw chicken eggs, as a symbol of women, and boxes of sanitary napkins and other kinds of things that they would leave all over the galleries to let people know women were present in the world. And so it was 10% before the 23%, but it still wasn't 50%. So she and Lucy Lepard and Poppy Johnson went to the opening with police whistles and just blew whistles all night long and did all kinds of making of mischief. And eventually, it's changed dramatically. But Betty Saar and Barbara Chase Ribot, whose name you may know as a novelist and historian, she's also a visual artist, these were the two artists that Faith Ringgold was trying to get into the Whitney, because they were her elders. And here's Betty Saar, and here's some of her work. So just take note again of the role of higher education and the role of social action in the work. We don't have time to unpack all of these the way we did the Aaron Douglas piece. Betty Saar became really well known for this series, The Liberation of Aunt Jemima, and did a lot of work with, again, visual culture, the visual culture of our world, and how it gets interpreted in combating stereotypes. This one she calls I've Got Rhythm. Then she did a very long series about her African-American women elders, women who had influenced her life, her aunts and her mother, and did a lot of work with personal imagery. And she also had two offspring who became really productive artists, and this is Allison Saar, her daughter. They did a lot of collaborative work together, and Allison Saar is very active today. A few more of her pieces. I know it's getting close to 1 o'clock. And you may notice now that we're into this world of women because, the national theme this year for African American History Month is African American women. So there are lots more men, but I wanted to highlight the women here for the contemporary art. Howardina Pindell, who I'm sorry I don't have a photograph of, also really active. She was a curator at the MoMA for years. This is an example of her work from the 90s. She did a lot of work in the AIDS awareness movement. And it's interesting to note how often the U.S. flag, the United States flag, and Statue of Liberty emerges in this work. This is another one of her works. She uses a lot of text representing some of the peoples and nations who faced and have used all means necessary against the colonizers, enslavers, missionaries, mass murderers, torturers, and thieves. Europeans who were driven by greed, barbarism, sexual depravity, have tried to destroy the world's cultures, populations, and ecosystems. She said, "Why go subtle?" That was her response. So, and she does a lot of very symbolic work about the Middle Passage and ghosts. And then we have more current, born in the 60s, Renee Cox, who uses her own body in photographs to do a lot of illustrated work here. She's a superhero freeing Aunt Jemima and Uncle Ben from their commercial boxes. And she's got lots and lots of different series. I encourage you to check out her work online. This is a piece from this is not a piece of quote art, it's a photograph from a New York Times newspaper from 2005. I was going to unpack with you, but I should probably wrap up, huh? People have to leave at 1? Okay. All right, well, we'll unpack this. We'll just take a couple minutes on this. Let's do this one again. What do you notice? What do you wonder? This one. What do you notice? What do you wonder? Anybody? Yell it out. Okay, Katrina, you say Hurricane Katrina. What makes you say that?
The water's rising, help.
Okay, the water is rising, help. So this is a familiar in our popular sort of parlance of our visual culture. What else do you notice about it? So we noticed the words right away. What else do you notice in this image? The United States flag. How many? 2 being waved and 1 here. What does flag waving usually mean? Yay! What else besides yay? Patriotism. I am American. I'm proud. What does it mean here?
We're part of the country.
Yes, we're part of the country and SOS. You should help us. What are your questions? Or what else do you notice? What are your questions? What happens next here to this story? What else do you notice or wonder? How could this happen? How could this happen? What else do you wonder? Please. They even wrote please. Okay, now if you were 12, you would say, who took this picture? Who took this picture? Were they in a Red Cross helicopter, or were they a news reporter? Did they keep flying by, or did they stop? Right? This would be one of the first things you say, right? The indignation. We're so accustomed to seeing these as adults. It's like, we just assume it was a news reporter and they went on by, but we don't know. But if we were 12, trust me, because I asked hundreds of them, 12-year-olds, and that's what they said. So there's a lot going on here. So this is why we need the arts to be fully integrated in STEM, fully integrated into all of our arts and humanities and sciences, because we need to develop this kind of critical literacy about our visual world and about our visual images. This is flag waving, and that's flag waving. What's happening in this one? All right, okay, could be the Tea Party. And you can't see in this picture, but this is a jumbotron of Obama. This is actually the inauguration from 3 years ago. All right, and then we've got Carol Walker, another African-American woman artist, and she's an Art 21 artist, meaning you could go to pbs.org, Art 21, and get full biography and film of her work and her talking about her work. And she does a lot of work with reclaiming old imagery. Notice how often we see African-American artists reclaiming an old image or an appropriated image and changing it and shifting it and playing with our consciousness about history. So she does this all the time with imagery. And again, she uses silhouettes. Who else used silhouettes? Aaron Douglas used silhouettes. Bernard Williams used silhouettes. What is that about the faceless person? It's something to ask ourselves. So she uses these silhouettes. These are installed in museums all over the country, and she layers video on top of them to tell lots of different stories and to play with stories that we've been told. And so then when Hurricane Katrina happened, she actually created a collection of her former work and put it together with quote art historical masters such as Joseph Turner, who's a really famous British painter, with other work to tell the story of Hurricane Katrina. And she created a book about it. So you can see that it's a 1996 piece, but she put it in her Hurricane Katrina 2005 piece. And then this was a response from a 12-year-old, or 13-year-old, 7th grade. After studying the news images, they made their own work. This is Bridget, and we don't really have time to see the videos of the kids talking about their work. And this is Tafazwa's. And And so this is what I call the link and the difference between humanitarian aid and social justice activism, right? In Hurricane Katrina and times like this, we say to the kids, bring in a can of soup, which is a good thing to do. It's not a bad thing to do, right? But when it's devoid of this kind of critical consciousness raising, the kids know it. Bring in a can of soup, bring in a can of tuna, turn to page 49. So this is a way in which we can engage all students. Okay, so these were our goals. Looking closely and deeply at a few images, we did that. Examine some student responses, very briefly. What is the political and anti-racist role of community colleges in the education of the arts for full participation in democratic society? So I'll leave you with that question mark, and we'll do one last human mic from Maxine Green, who tells us, remember the role of imagination here. Imagining things being otherwise may be a first step toward acting on the belief that they can be changed. And it would appear that a kindred imaginative ability is required if the becoming different that learning involves is actually to take place. A space of freedom opens before the person moved to choose in the light of possibility. She or he feels what it signifies to be an initiator and an agent. Existing among others, but with the power to choose. Thank you very much.